When I moved to Chicago, I was excited about the opportunity to start a new life in a big city. My name is Laura, and like many young professionals, I looked for an affordable place to live. I found an online ad for a shared house with a man named Greg. He seemed friendly in the messages and during the visit, which made me confident that it would be a good choice. In the first few days after moving in, Greg was extremely welcoming. He showed me around the house, explained the basic rules, and offered to introduce me to the city. However, it didn't take long for things to start feeling a bit off. Greg had a controlling way of doing things, always insisting that I follow his routines and schedules. Initially, I thought he was just trying to be helpful, but soon realized there was something more sinister in his behavior. One evening, while I was in the living room, Greg began asking personal questions that made me uncomfortable. He inquired about my previous relationships, my work schedule, and even my sleeping habits. I was puzzled by his curiosity, but responded politely, trying not to raise suspicions. That same week, I noticed he was becoming increasingly invasive. If I went out to meet friends, he wanted to know exactly who I was with and what time I would be back. I started hearing stories from Greg's former roommates. A friend of mine, who coincidentally knew a previous roommate of his, told me that Greg had a history of inappropriate behavior with other women. They mentioned episodes of excessive control and invasions of privacy. My concern grew, and I began to notice small signs that I had previously ignored, such as him suddenly appearing in places where I was in the house, without any apparent reason. The situation reached a critical point when, one night, Greg entered the bathroom while I was taking a shower. He claimed he needed to discuss something urgent, but I knew that was just an excuse to invade my space. My immediate reaction was panic. I screamed for him to get out, and when he finally did, I rushed out of the bathroom, dressed only in a towel. My heart was racing, and I knew I needed to get out of that house immediately. The night of the incident was one of the most terrifying of my life. I was taking a shower after a long day at work, trying to relax, when I heard the bathroom door open. My heart instantly raced. At first, I thought I had locked the door, but clearly I had not. Greg entered, claiming he needed to discuss something urgent with me. His expression was disturbingly calm, which only increased my dread. "Greg, what are you doing here? Get out!" I shouted, trying to keep the towel wrapped around my body. He stood in the doorway, insisting that he needed to talk to me right then. The tension in the air was palpable. The invasion of my personal space made me feel completely vulnerable. The only thing I could think of was to escape as quickly as possible. In an act of pure desperation, I pushed Greg with all the strength I could muster and ran out of the bathroom. Still wrapped in the towel, I went straight to my room, locking the door behind me. My thoughts were racing, and my hands were shaking so much that I almost dropped my phone while trying to turn it on. I finally managed to dial the police, explaining the situation as quickly as I could, between tears and sobs. I waited in the room, hearing Greg's footsteps on the other side of the door. He was pacing back and forth in the hallway, murmuring something I couldn't understand. Each second seemed like an eternity as I waited for the police to arrive. I tried to calm myself, taking deep breaths, but the fear that he might try to break down the door was overwhelming. After what seemed like an interminable time, I heard sirens approaching. I looked through the window and saw the police lights reflected on the walls of the house. The relief was immediate. I ran to the door and unlocked it, ready to leave my room as soon as it was safe. The police knocked on the front door, and Greg answered, trying to act normal, but his voice betrayed his tension. The police entered the house, and one of them came to my room. I opened the door and explained everything that had happened. They were understanding and assured me that I would be safe. They took Greg to another room and started questioning him while one of the officers helped me gather my things. I left the house that night, still shaking, but feeling immense relief at being safe. The experience was traumatic, but I knew I had made the right decision by calling the police. After leaving the house that night with the help of the police, I was taken to a safe place to spend the night. The experience had left me deeply shaken, and I knew I couldn't return to that environment. The next day, I went to the police station to officially report the incident and provide my full statement. The police assured me that Greg would be investigated for his invasive and controlling behavior. I temporarily found shelter at a friend's house while looking for a new place to live. Every sudden noise made me jump, and the feeling of vulnerability was constant. The presence of friends and family was crucial as I began to process what had happened. The nights were the worst. Nightmares made me relive the moment Greg entered the bathroom, and I would wake up sweating, my heart racing. The process of filing a complaint against Greg was long and exhausting, but necessary. I discovered that several other women had gone through similar experiences with him, but many had not had the courage to report it. Knowing that my action could prevent him from doing the same to others gave me the strength to continue. The investigation revealed a pattern of disturbing behavior, and Greg was eventually arrested for his actions. Meanwhile, I dedicated myself to finding a new place to live. It was difficult to trust roommates again, so I decided to look for an apartment on my own, even if it meant tightening my budget. My priority was my safety and peace of mind. After a few weeks, I found a small apartment in a quiet neighborhood. Moving to the new home was a relief, and I began to feel that I could finally start to rebuild my life. The experience taught me important lessons about the need to be vigilant and protect my own safety. I learned to trust my instincts more and to be more cautious about who I choose to share a space with. I also decided to seek psychological support to deal with the trauma and the nightmares that continued to haunt me. Therapy was a crucial step in my recovery, helping me process the fear and residual anxiety. What happened to me was terrifying, but it also showed me the importance of reporting inappropriate behavior and seeking help. I thank every day for having had the courage to call the police that night. Although I still have emotional scars, I am stronger and determined not to let fear control my life. Sharing my story is a way to help other people recognize signs of danger and take the necessary measures to protect themselves. During my sophomore year at the university in Austin, I shared a house with a roommate named Ethan. My name is Kevin, and like many students, I opted to share housing to cut down on costs. At first, Ethan seemed like a normal guy, somewhat reserved, but friendly enough. However, it didn't take long for me to start noticing strange behaviors that made me uncomfortable. The first few weeks were quiet, but soon I realized that Ethan had unusual habits. He made audio recordings at night, claiming it was for a college project. I didn't think much of it initially, until the recordings began to involve me. On several occasions, I woke up in the middle of the night to the sound of his voice recording strange conversations and invasive questions about my personal life. Ethan also started to ask uncomfortable questions during the day. He inquired about my relationships, my daily routine, and even about intimate details that were none of his business. When I tried to confront him about this, he always had a ready excuse, saying it was just curiosity, or that he was conducting research for a project. But the frequency and nature of these questions began to make me uneasy. The situation worsened when I began to notice subtle changes in my room. Objects that I was sure I had left in one place were found in another, and personal documents seemed to have been tampered with. The feeling that someone was invading my personal space deeply bothered me. I tried to ignore these signs, attributing them to academic stress, but the discomfort only grew. I decided to take action and inspect my room more closely. One day, while cleaning my room, I found a small recording device hidden among the books on my bookshelf. The discovery was horrifying. My heart raced, and a wave of fear overwhelmed me. Ethan was recording my conversations and deliberately violating my privacy. The reality of this invasion was hard to accept, and I knew I needed to act immediately to protect my privacy and safety. The discovery of the recording device in my room was a profound shock. I stood still for a few minutes, trying to process what it meant. The feeling of invasion was overwhelming. Ethan, my housemate, had been deliberately recording my conversations and possibly monitoring all my movements. Feeling a mix of anger and fear, I knew I needed to confront him and take immediate steps to ensure my safety. With the recording device in hand, I went to Ethan's room. I knocked on the door, and he opened it with a look of surprise. "We need to talk," I said, trying to stay calm. I showed him the recording device and asked directly why he was monitoring my conversations. Ethan was visibly disconcerted but tried to justify his actions by saying it was for academic curiosity and that he had no ill intentions. My hands trembled with anger. "Academic curiosity? You invaded my privacy! This is unacceptable!" I shouted, unable to contain my frustration. Ethan tried to argue, but I could no longer trust anything he said. I knew I needed to act quickly to protect my rights and my safety. The conversation was going nowhere, so I decided it was time to seek help. I left the house immediately and went straight to the Student Housing Administration. I explained the situation and showed the recording device as evidence. They were equally horrified and promised to investigate the case. While waiting for the outcome of the investigation, I stayed at a friend's house to avoid any further contact with Ethan. The administration assured me they would take steps to ensure my safety and privacy. The following days were filled with constant anxiety. The Student Housing Administration initiated a formal investigation, and Ethan was called in to provide explanations. During this period, I tried to focus on my studies, but the feeling of vulnerability and the anger of being betrayed by someone I trusted consumed me. Friends and family supported me, offering comfort and words of encouragement, which helped me endure the tension. Finally, the Housing Administration concluded the investigation. Ethan was expelled from the student housing for a severe violation of privacy. The news brought immense relief, but it also left a permanent mark. The experience taught me to be more cautious about whom I trust and to value my privacy. Moving to a new place was a fresh start, but the lessons learned from this experience would never leave me. With Ethan's expulsion from student housing, I finally felt significant relief. However, the experience had left a deep mark on me, and I knew regaining trust would be difficult. I began looking for a new place to live, somewhere I could feel safe and at peace. The idea of sharing housing with someone again was daunting, so I decided to look for a studio or a one-bedroom apartment, even if it meant a tighter budget. After a few weeks of searching, I found a small studio near campus. It was modest, but sufficient for my needs. The moving process was quick, and my friends helped me settle in. The feeling of having my own space, where I could control who came in and out, was an indescribable relief. For the first time in months, I managed to sleep through the night without being disturbed by thoughts of privacy invasion. As I adjusted to the new place, I reflected a lot on what had happened. The experience with Ethan taught me the importance of always being alert to warning signs and trusting my instincts. I decided to share my story with colleagues and friends to warn them about the dangers of invasive behaviors and the importance of protecting our privacy. The response was positive, and many were surprised to learn what I had gone through. In addition to sharing my experience, I sought psychological support to deal with the trauma. Therapy sessions helped me process the fear and residual anxiety and provided tools to rebuild my confidence. I learned to establish clearer boundaries and to value my security above all else. Recovery was a gradual process, but each step made me feel stronger and more resilient. Gradually, I began to feel more comfortable in my new environment. I returned to focusing on my studies and participated in extracurricular activities to distract myself and make new friends. The experience with Ethan had changed my perspective, but I did not let it define me. I used what I learned to become more vigilant and proactive in protecting my privacy and safety. Over time, life returned to normal. I made new friends, excelled academically, and even found time for hobbies I had set aside. The experience with Ethan would always be in my memory, but now it served as a constant reminder of the importance of being prepared and vigilant. Through this adversity, I discovered a new strength within me, one that allowed me not just to survive, but to thrive. And so, I moved forward, stronger and wiser than before. When I moved to Los Angeles, I was excited about the opportunity to start afresh in a vibrant city. My name is Peter, and like many newcomers, I looked for an affordable apartment to share with someone. I found an online ad, and, after a quick visit, decided to share the apartment with a man named Gary. He seemed a bit eccentric but friendly and organized, which initially pleased me. Shortly after moving in, I realized that Gary had very strict rules for the house. He insisted on specific times for using the common areas, obsessively controlled the thermostat, and most strangely, strictly forbade the use of the attic. At first, I thought he just liked to keep everything orderly, but signs of strange behavior quickly began to appear. The first few weeks were relatively quiet, but I began to hear noises from the attic at night. Sometimes it was the sound of light footsteps. Other times, it seemed like someone was moving things up there. When I asked Gary about the noises, he became visibly uncomfortable and evasive, saying it was probably the wind or the old building structure. But my instinct told me there was something more. In addition to the noises, I started to notice that some of my belongings in the living room were being moved. Books that I had left in one place appeared in another, and some personal items seemed to have been tampered with. I confronted Gary about this, but he always denied any involvement, suggesting I was imagining things. This constant sense of invasion and Gary's strange behaviors began to make me extremely uncomfortable. The last straw was one night when I was trying to sleep, but was awakened by a loud noise from the attic. I got up to investigate, and, upon opening my bedroom door, saw Gary standing in the hallway, staring intently at the attic door. When he saw me, he quickly turned and went back to his room without a word. Fear took over me. I knew I needed to get out of that apartment as soon as possible. That night was one of the scariest of my life. After seeing Gary standing in the hallway, staring at the attic door, a chill ran down my spine. I returned to my room and locked the door, but I knew I wouldn't be able to sleep. The noises in the attic continued, and Gary's unsettling presence in the house kept me on constant alert. Lying in bed, I tried to calm down and think about what to do. My mind was racing, and the feeling of danger was increasingly intense. I got up again and began looking for my cell phone to call a friend, but as I opened the bedroom door, I was confronted by Gary standing right in front of it, staring directly at me. His gaze was empty and disturbing, as if he were in a trance. "Gary, what are you doing?" I asked, trying to keep calm, but my voice betrayed the fear I felt. He didn't respond immediately, just kept staring at me intently. Finally, he said in a low, almost robotic tone, "We need to follow the rules." His words were incomprehensible and only heightened my terror. Without waiting for further explanation, I pushed him aside and ran to the living room. I grabbed my cell phone and called a friend, quickly explaining the situation and asking for help. While I waited, I began packing some things in a backpack, determined to leave that house that night. Gary, however, did not seem willing to let me go easily. He followed me to the living room, still with that empty expression, and tried to block my exit. In a pure act of survival instinct, I grabbed my keys and ran to the front door, managing to get out before he could stop me. I ran down the building's hallway and down the stairs as fast as I could, not looking back. When I finally reached the street, I felt immediate relief, but I knew I still needed a safe place to go. My friend arrived within minutes and took me to his house. The feeling of being out of the apartment and away from Gary was an indescribable relief. However, the experience left me deeply shaken. I spent the night at my friend's house, trying to process everything that had happened and decide what to do next. I knew I couldn't return to that apartment, and I needed to take steps to ensure my safety and emotional recovery. After the terrifying night with Gary, I realized I needed a radical change to ensure my safety and peace of mind. I spent the following days looking for a new place to live, and with the help of friends and family, I managed to find a small but comfortable apartment in a quieter neighborhood of Los Angeles. The feeling of having my own space, where I could feel secure, was a great relief. The move to the new apartment was swift. Friends came to help, and soon I was settled into my new home. The environment was welcoming and free from the strange rules and behaviors I had experienced with Gary. However, the experience left me with emotional scars. I had difficulty sleeping, constantly worried about the possibility of someone invading my privacy again. I decided to seek professional help to deal with the trauma. Therapy sessions were crucial for my recovery. I spoke openly about my fears and insecurities, and the therapist helped me develop strategies to cope with anxiety and regain my confidence. Through therapy, I began to understand the importance of setting clear boundaries and trusting my instincts. As I worked to overcome the experience, I also reflected on the lessons learned. I realized the importance of carefully choosing who to share a space with. I made a promise to myself to never ignore warning signs and always prioritize my safety. I shared my story with friends and colleagues, warning them about the dangers of living with people who exhibit controlling and invasive behaviors. Gradually, I began to rebuild my life. I returned to focus on my work and hobbies, and gradually, a sense of normality returned. I made new friends and reconnected with old ones, creating a support network that was essential for my recovery. The experience with Gary made me more vigilant and resilient, but it also showed me the importance of being surrounded by trustworthy people. Today, I feel stronger and more prepared to face challenges. Fear and insecurity still surface from time to time, but I have learned to manage them healthily. The experience taught me to value my security and the importance of protecting my privacy. Looking back, I see that despite the terror I lived through, I managed to turn a traumatic situation into valuable learning, becoming a more aware and cautious person.